This took place in 2011, when I was 20 years old and had just moved into my first apartment on my own. It was a small one-bedroom unit located on the second floor of a 3-story building. The building was old but well-maintained and tidy. I found the apartment through an online listing site. The rent was cheap, and it was close to my college, so I signed the lease without giving it too much thought. The landlord handed me the keys and told me to reach out if I ever needed anything. The first week living there was peaceful. I unpacked gradually, set up my desk near the window, and spent a lot of time getting everything arranged. Since I was taking online classes and working part-time, I rarely went out except for grocery runs. The apartment was quiet day and night, and I almost never saw anyone else in the hallways. On Monday morning of the second week, I found a printed notice taped to my door from the building's management. It mentioned a noise complaint coming from my unit. According to the note, someone had reported the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor late at night, and I was asked to keep the noise down after 10 p.m. I was completely baffled. I hadn't moved anything around, and nothing in the apartment had changed. I figured maybe they mixed up the units or someone misheard a noise. But then on Thursday, another notice appeared. Same complaint. Same dragging noises. That's when I decided to start recording the apartment at night. I didn't own any special equipment, so I used my phone. I cleared space, set it to record video, and placed it on the bookshelf in the living room, pointed toward the table and chairs. Since the phone could only record for a few hours, I fully charged it and started recording just before going to bed. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. Nothing unusual, everything was still and silent. I repeated this the following night. Again, no activity. But on the third night, I caught something subtle. Around 2:20 a.m., the camera frame stayed still for a bit, then briefly shook, like it had been lightly nudged. The video continued as normal after that, but I noticed the chair was no longer in the same place. It had shifted just a few inches away from the table. I kept recording for 2 more nights and saw more small changes. Once the chair was tucked in, then it wasn't. One night, the edge of the rug was slightly folded. I was sure I wasn't sleepwalking, and every morning the front door was still locked. So I ordered a small battery-powered camera that saved footage to a memory card. I hid it behind a stack of books, aimed directly at the entrance. I wanted to see if someone was getting inside. The camera recorded overnight, and the next morning, I took out the memory card and watched the footage on my laptop. I skimmed through until just after 2 a.m. At 2:17, the front door unlocked from the outside. A man entered, closed the door behind him, and walked straight to the dining area. Without hesitation, he placed both hands on the table and slowly dragged it across the floor. He then knelt down, lifted 2 loose floorboards, and pulled something out from underneath, an item wrapped in plastic. He examined it briefly in the light, then tucked it inside his jacket. After that, he replaced the boards, moved the table back, and left. He wasn't in a hurry and clearly knew exactly where to go. Later that day, I showed the video to the landlord. He was silent for a long time, then said he needed to check something and asked to come inside. He returned with a flashlight and a crowbar. He pried up the same floorboards beneath the table and found 2 plastic bags. Inside each were bundles of old cash. That evening, the police came. After watching the footage and inspecting the floor, one of the officers said it was likely most of the money had already been removed, probably over several nights. What remained was likely just what the man hadn't gotten to yet. They asked the landlord some questions, collected the bags as evidence, and said they'd follow up if more information came to light. An officer gave me the report number and advised changing the locks if I planned to stay. But I didn't. I packed my belongings over the next 2 weeks. I couldn't stop thinking about someone entering my apartment while I slept, night after night, someone walking across the floor I stood on, touching things without me ever knowing. I kept imagining what could have happened if I had woken up or if he had gone into the wrong room. This happened in 2021, shortly after I moved into a small apartment complex located in the northern part of the city. I was 25 at the time, working remotely as a junior analyst. The building was old but sturdy, with 5 floors and mostly long-term residents. I had rented a one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor. It wasn't anything luxurious, but it was clean and reasonably priced. I didn't know many people in the building, just a guy named Ron who lived across the hall and gave me a nod whenever we crossed paths. Nothing out of the ordinary happened until my 3rd week there. That's when I began waking up around 3:30 a.m., always at the same time and always for no clear reason. At first, I thought it was just restless sleep. But then I noticed a faint odor coming from the corner of the bedroom, near the floor vent. It wasn't overpowering, but it was odd, like the smell of cooking onions mixed with something metallic. The first time, I assumed it might be coming from a neighboring unit. I got up and checked the vent, thinking maybe something was stuck or leaking, but I found nothing, and the smell faded soon after. I cracked a window and went back to bed. Still, it kept happening. I even taped over the vent at one point, thinking maybe the heating system was pushing old air through, but the smell still managed to seep in. There were no footsteps, no voices, not even a creak. Just silence. Then one night, I decided to stay awake. I left the lights off and sat on my bed, staring at the vent. At exactly 3:30, the smell returned. But this time, I also heard something, faint and subtle. It wasn't coming from within my apartment but from the vent itself, a slow, uneven breathing sound. It lasted about 10 seconds, then stopped. After that, I barely slept. I didn't talk to anyone about it, mostly because I didn't know how to explain it, a weird smell in the middle of the night, and faint breathing noises that disappeared as quickly as they came. On the nights it didn't happen, it somehow felt even worse. I would lie there awake, staring at the ceiling, just waiting. Some nights there was nothing. Others, the smell came back. Eventually, I gave up on the bedroom and started sleeping on the couch instead. One day while taking out the trash, I noticed something strange. The apartment directly below mine had no doormat and no visible unit number. I walked past it slowly and paused, expecting to hear the quiet hum of an empty room. Instead, I heard a dull thump, followed by silence. Later, I saw Ron in the hallway and asked him if he knew anything about the unit below mine. He hesitated, then said it had been empty for a while, 5 or 6 months, maybe. The previous tenant moved out and never came back for his security deposit. That same night, the smell came back again, stronger this time, and not just once. It happened twice. But there was something else. I heard a dragging noise, slow and rough, coming through the vent. The next morning, I stood outside the door of the apartment below and listened. I didn't hear anything but the faint buzz of the hallway light. I called the building manager and told him something didn't feel right, that maybe the unit underneath mine wasn't actually empty. He sounded tired, said he'd check on it, and hung up. That night, I stayed up again and pressed my phone against the vent to record audio. The next morning, I played it back. The sound was faint, but it was definitely there, shallow breathing, and some light scraping noises. I sent the recording to the manager and asked him to investigate. 2 days later, a locksmith arrived with him. I watched from the stairwell as they unlocked the door to Unit 2B. The moment the door opened, the smell hit, much stronger than before. They went in with flashlights. I stayed outside. About 5 minutes later, the manager came out and asked me to come down. Inside, they'd found signs someone had been living there, a sleeping bag, a small portable stove, and a few plastic grocery bags filled with clothes. The police arrived that evening. After reviewing the audio, one of the officers suggested that whoever had been staying there had likely been entering and exiting through the basement. They believed he'd been using the vent to listen for movement upstairs. They didn't find him, but they said he might have been living there for weeks, maybe even longer. This took place in 2017 when I was about 25 and living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a decent area of the city. It wasn't a luxury place, but it was tidy and felt safe. I was working at a dental clinic across town, usually got home at the same time each evening, and mostly kept to myself. I didn't really know my neighbors, just recognized a few people from passing them in the hall. One Tuesday around 4 p.m., I got home and was still wearing my scrubs while heating up dinner in the kitchen when I heard 2 knocks on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a gray uniform, holding a clipboard and a small black toolkit. There was a patch on his shirt that said, "Building Maintenance." He told me he was doing a routine inspection on the gas lines and pointed to an ID badge, saying it wouldn't take long. I hadn't received any notice about an inspection, but I assumed maybe they had just forgotten to inform me. So I let him in. He walked straight into the kitchen, crouched down, and looked under the sink. Then he checked the wall vent by the counter. He used a flashlight, didn't ask any questions, and moved with confidence like he knew what to check. He also looked at the radiator in the corner, knelt next to it briefly, then stood up, said everything looked good, and left. I didn't think anything of it until later that night. I dropped my keys near the radiator and noticed something on the floor, a small metal tool used for tightening pipe valves. I assumed he had accidentally left it behind while inspecting the radiator. The next morning, I called the building office to let them know and asked how I could return the tool to whoever had stopped by. The manager asked for more information and then told me no maintenance visits had been scheduled for my unit, or any other unit, that week. No one had been sent. After that call, I figured maybe the guy had simply gone to the wrong apartment. I set the tool in a drawer by the front door and didn't think much more about it. A few weeks went by without anything unusual. No one followed up, and I went back to my usual routine. Then one night, I woke up to a faint noise. It wasn't loud, just a quiet clicking sound near the front door. I stayed still and listened. I got up and moved slowly toward the door. The sound wasn't coming from the hallway, it was right at my lock. Someone was trying to unlock it from the outside. I flipped on the hallway light and yelled out loud. The clicking stopped immediately. A second later, I heard quick footsteps rushing away. I opened the door and looked out. There was a man running down the hallway toward the stairs. Even from behind, I recognized him. It was the same man who had claimed to be with maintenance. As soon as he turned the corner and disappeared down the stairwell, I shut and locked the door again. Then I picked up my phone and called the police. I gave them my address and explained that someone had tried to break into my apartment. The police showed up in under 15 minutes. 2 officers came in and examined the door. They found light scratch marks around the lock, nothing major, but clear signs that someone had been trying to pick it. They asked if I knew who it was, and I told them about the man who had come in weeks earlier pretending to be from building maintenance. I also showed them the tool he had left behind. They took notes, photographed the lock, and said they would file a report. I asked about security footage, but I already knew, there weren't any cameras on my floor. The building hadn't installed any. The officers stayed for a bit longer and said they'd increase patrols nearby, but without a name or video, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to contact them again if anything else occurred. That night, I couldn't sleep. I propped a chair under the doorknob and left a few lights on. The following morning, I told the building manager everything. She looked genuinely worried and said she'd send someone around to inspect the other unit's locks. She also said she would remind tenants not to let unknown workers into their apartments. But none of that changed the fact that he had already gotten inside once. I never saw him again. No one else in the building reported anything similar. A few weeks back, I began taking my 2 dogs on walks around the forest that borders our land. I was trying to figure out where our property ended and just enjoy being out in the peaceful nature. Eventually, we got to the edge of our land where the national forest starts. I wanted to keep going, knowing there was a trail not far from there that led up the mountain to a rest area. My plan was to hike up, then call my boyfriend to come get me and the dogs from the top. The whole hike would take about an hour and a half. There's a road used by park rangers that leads up there, so it'd be easy for him to drive and meet us. We were about halfway to the trail, or at least I thought we were, when something suddenly grabbed my dog Crush's full attention. He wouldn't stop, wouldn't come back no matter how many times I called. Thankfully, my other dog stayed calm and close by. I didn't have a choice, I had to follow Crush. We went further into the forest, trying to find him. That's when I heard a strange, harsh noise nearby. It was deep and aggressive, and I instantly thought of a wild boar. If you've never heard one, just imagine the most unsettling sound you can think of, like something straight out of a nightmare. That's what it reminded me of. I got nervous fast, knowing how dangerous boars can be. I called out for Crush again, desperate for him to come back. I could still hear him barking, so I followed the sound through the trees. Eventually, I found him standing near a large tree, barking and growling at something up above. I tried to grab his collar and pull him away, but he wouldn't budge. He was fixated on whatever was in that tree. I ended up having to lift him, he weighs nearly 80 pounds, and shuffle slowly about 100 feet with him in my arms before I could put him down. It wasn't easy. Meanwhile, my other dog stayed near the tree, whining with her tail tucked tightly under her, clearly afraid. I called for her, but instead of coming to me, she turned and ran off in the opposite direction. I looked up to try and see what they had been reacting to, but I couldn't make anything out clearly. I just assumed it must have been a huge raccoon or maybe something similar. It took nearly 2 hours to get back to our land with both dogs. Once home, I told my boyfriend what had happened. He warned me not to take the dogs that far into the woods without leashes to avoid something like this again. I asked him what he thought they had seen in the tree, and he guessed it was probably a raccoon or maybe an opossum. But that didn't explain the loud, boar-like noise I had heard. He just shrugged and said, "It's the woods, there's a lot of wildlife," and left it at that. A few days later, while I was working from home, both dogs suddenly went nuts. Crush started growling and barking, leaping up at the window like he was trying to get at something outside. I yelled at them to quiet down since I had an important phone call coming up. To settle them, I let them out and planned to bring them back in after the call. The whole call lasted maybe 10 minutes. When I opened the door afterward, my smaller dog was sitting on the porch. She ran inside as soon as she saw me, but Crush was nowhere to be found. I stepped outside and started calling his name. I scanned the yard and the tree line, looking for his big black body, but didn't see or hear him. I walked toward the construction site where our house is still being built. That's where I spotted him. He was standing still on the right side of the unfinished house. I called to him, but he didn't move. He just stared, frozen. Then I saw what he was looking at. There was something big and low to the ground. I didn't know what it was at first. My initial thought was maybe it was a sick, hairless bear. It was huge. But I knew there weren't any bears in that forest. I had researched it before we moved in because I didn't want my dogs encountering one. Bears are bulky and muscular. This thing was thinner, almost underfed. It had some patchy fur along its back, dark brown or black in color. I couldn't make out its face, but what stood out was that it didn't have a snout like most wild animals. That's when a sense of real fear hit me. I grabbed Crush by the collar and slowly pulled him back toward the construction area. As we stepped onto the concrete, I kept my eyes locked on the thing. It was still about 10 yards away. That's when I heard the exact same chilling sound I had heard before, the one like a wild boar. But this time, it came from the creature itself. Crush went wild again, barking like mad and trying to charge it. I had a tight grip on his collar, and he nearly dragged me with him. I yanked him back and said, "Forget this," then turned and sprinted toward our mobile home. I called my boyfriend repeatedly until he finally answered. I was panicked, yelling at him to come home right away. Something was out there. He got home in about 10 minutes and drove his truck straight to the construction site. When he came back, he told me he hadn't seen anything. It's been a couple of weeks since then. But just this past weekend, I saw it again. My boyfriend was working late, so I was home alone with the dogs, watching TV. After a while, my smaller dog scratched at the door. She needed to go out, and Crush followed her. I let them both out to do their business. A few minutes later, I opened the door again. My smaller dog rushed inside, trembling, and immediately hid under the dining table. She wouldn't come out, no matter how much I called. I called for Crush, but he didn't appear. He's black, and it was dark outside, so I grabbed a flashlight to search around. Near the back of the house, close to the trees, I saw a large, furry black shape. I assumed it was Crush and called out, but the shape didn't move. I walked toward it, but suddenly, I heard a bark from behind me. My stomach dropped. My heart felt like it stopped. I realized something terrible. Crush wasn't in front of me. He was behind me. Whatever I had been walking toward, it wasn't my dog. I was frozen in fear. I didn't even want to turn around. But something inside me snapped. I got mad. Scared. Desperate. So I started yelling at the thing. I picked up sticks and threw them. I don't know what I was thinking. Before I knew it, I was running at it. I got within 5 feet before the creature leapt into the woods. Its back legs were long, almost too long, and I thought for a second it might kick me. The smell it left behind was disgusting, like soil mixed with rot. As it ran, I got a better look at its body. It looked oddly human from the back. Its limbs were long, but its torso was short and twisted. Thank God I didn't follow it. I snapped out of it and walked back toward Crush in the house. But just as I was calming down, I heard that same horrible sound again. Only this time, it was everywhere, echoing from all around the woods. I told my boyfriend, but he just brushed it off, said I was probably imagining things. I called my dad instead. He took it seriously and told me to burn sage around the property and have a shaman bless the land.